On a chilly morning, with weak sunlight filtering through the thick gray clouds, the small village of Green Hollow, nestled by a quiet river, seemed to be cloaked in a dense fog. A place of peace where no one would expect anything more than the ordinary. This quaint little village was about to be shattered by a shocking event. A desperate scream rang out from Sarah Miller's house, the wife of David Miller, causing everyone in the village to jump awake. Sarah, trembling, stood frozen in shock as she stared at her husband's lifeless body, lying in a pool of blood. His face was completely disfigured, blood splattered everywhere around him. By the time the police arrived, the scene was nothing short of horrifying. David's body lay in the forest, a few kilometers from his home. We had seen many murders in our career, but this one was beyond comprehension. David had been stabbed at least 7 times, each wound deep enough to cause instant death. But what sent chills down our spines was the brutality of the killer's actions. This was not just a murder. It was an act of sheer hatred, his body discarded like trash in the wild woods. Forensic expert Laura Pierce and her team were the first to reach the scene. She described, "The stench from the decomposing body is overpowering, which suggests the victim had been dead for several days. Despite the decomposition, the stab wounds are still very clear. Some are deep into the chest and abdomen, indicating the killer was targeting vital organs. The team couldn't take their eyes off a hammer found near the body, stained with blood. It seemed this tool had been the first weapon used before the fatal stabbings. However, one peculiar detail that caught Emily's attention was a smartphone found near the body, seemingly discarded in haste. The phone belonged to David. While the forensic team continued to gather evidence, Emily decided to check the phone. She unlocked it and discovered a few recent messages, including a missed call from an unknown number. This raised more questions in Emily's mind, suggesting that the murder might not have been random, but rather connected to some unresolved confrontation. As Emily continued her investigation, she started asking about David's relationships. One of the first people to come under suspicion was Daniel Walker, David's son-in-law, a person the Miller family rarely spoke of. Daniel was known to have a troubled history with drugs and had frequently been in trouble with the law. In stark contrast to David's calm and composed nature, Daniel had always been on bad terms with the family. He had been lectured many times by David about his reckless behavior and laziness. The village had also noted that Daniel had been missing for several days before the murder. Initially, no one believed Daniel could be involved, but upon reviewing David's phone records, Emily found that David had met with Daniel just 48 hours before his death. As the investigation continued, Emily discovered more disturbing details about Daniel. The last time he had been at David's construction company was after a heated argument about a large loan that David had given him. Daniel had complained about this debt, and according to colleagues, David had decided to cut him off financially. Just before the murder, David had made it clear that he would no longer offer any support to Daniel. Friends of Daniel revealed that he had often been seen agitated, complaining about his struggles with life due to the unpaid debt. This led Emily to suspect that Daniel, unable to cope with David's refusal, might have resorted to violence. As Emily continued to investigate Daniel's background, a key piece of evidence emerged. A fingerprint found on the hammer at the crime scene matched Daniel's. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. This was a pivotal moment. To confirm this further, she ordered the police to search Daniel's phone and discovered that all calls and messages from the time surrounding the murder had been erased. All the clues pointed back to Daniel. Not only that, but witnesses reported seeing him near the forest area on the night before David's murder. It seemed that the killer had hastily discarded the evidence in an attempt to avoid being caught. Once enough evidence was gathered, Emily decided to organize a manhunt for Daniel. However, He had already fled the village shortly after the murder. Emily and her team traced him to a remote, abandoned house deep in the forest. They began their operation at midnight, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. At first, no one was sure if Daniel was still inside. But when a noise from the upper floor broke the silence, they immediately stormed the building. A tense standoff ensued between the police and Daniel. Though he tried to escape, he was eventually cornered and taken into custody. Throughout the confrontation, Daniel insisted on his innocence, but the evidence was irrefutable, and he was forced to confess. As Daniel was escorted out of the station, Emily noticed a strange, almost regretful look in his eyes. She had never imagined that a debt could be such a powerful motive for someone to commit such a horrific act. It was hard to accept the truth that beneath the facade of a loving son-in-law, Daniel was a cold-blooded killer. The case came to a close, leaving the entire village in shock. From someone no one suspected, Daniel had turned out to be the most brutal murderer Green Hollow had ever seen. The story of an unpaid debt and a brutal act of revenge would remain a chilling memory for everyone involved.